On this Monday night, a mass shooting at an Ontario condo complex. The victims.
Once the officers arrived, they were met with a horrendous scene.
The 73-year-old gunman and the lawsuit he filed against his building's board. Plus, the January 6th committee's historic decision. The criminal charges being recommended against former President Trump. Crime against humanity. The Netherlands apologizes for its involvement in slavery.
The Dutch state enabled and stimulated slavery and profited from it.
Why critics say sorry isn't enough. And ancient designs just discovered. What's been hiding in plain sight in Peru for centuries?
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Sophie Louie.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a violent rampage at a condo building in Vaughan, just north of Toronto. 5 people shot dead. A 6th is in hospital. And the suspect, also a resident of the building, killed by police.
Officers arrived to find a horrific scene, with 5 deceased victims having been shot and killed in 3 separate units. As you're aware, there was an interaction between the officers and a 73-year-old male suspect, a resident of that building, who died on the 3rd floor.
Mike Drolet has the latest on what we know about the victims and the suspect who'd been locked in a bitter dispute with the condo board.
It took police just over 3 minutes to arrive on scene after the 911 call. Somewhere inside this vast condo tower, a single gunman was on the loose, forcing residents to evacuate.
And as I started to go downstairs, I heard 4 loud shots.
By then, the gunman, who has been identified as Francesco Villi, had already visited 3 separate homes with a handgun, killing 5 and wounding a 6th. Police confronted and killed him on the 3rd floor.
The officer in that interaction is a 24-year veteran of York Regional Police, and he very likely saved lives by his actions last night.
The 73-year-old man who was shot by police was well known to his neighbors, to whom he complained often. He was also prolific at posting videos on social media, and over the last few days they appeared increasingly disjointed.
Indeed, when approached today, residents painted a picture of a troubled man who was quick to anger.
We all felt threatened all the time.
I got scared of him, so whenever I saw him, I would evade him.
Villi's issues, according to multiple neighbors, began over 7 years ago when he complained of a hum emanating from the electrical room beneath his unit.
The floor vibrates in the morning. I shake and tremble. I try to sleep under my bed. There's no sleeping. Boom, 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 boom. And in the morning I shake like I have Parkinson. Because my bed trembles, you bastards!
He sued the condo corporation as well as specific board members for torment and torture that cannot be explained in words. The suit was dismissed as frivolous and vexatious. 3 of the victims were members of the condo board, which decided to try and get him evicted. That hearing was supposed to be today. Former board member John Santoro says he tried to help Villi over the years.
He wasn't a monster.
A fact, he says, that likely saved his life.
I know the history, and I know the man, I know the board of directors, I know this has been brewing for a long time, and I've commented to my wife several times this is going to end very badly.
Sadly, he was right. Mike Drolet, Global News, Vaughan, Ontario.
And just outside of Vaughan in Toronto, police say multiple people were assaulted by a woman at a subway station this morning. Toronto police say an off-duty officer managed to detain the woman until police arrived and arrested her. Paramedics say 1 person was taken to hospital with minor injuries. There have been multiple incidents of violence on the TTC in recent weeks, including the stabbing death of 1 woman and other random attacks on passengers. In Washington, the January 6th committee made history today, the panel voting unanimously to refer criminal charges against former President Donald Trump, claiming he was at the center of plans to overturn election results. And his actions led to the incitement of fatal violence at the Capitol 2 years ago. Jackson Proskow reports on the investigation and its recommendations.
The January 6th committee ended its work by making history, referring former President Donald Trump to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution.
We understand the gravity of each and every referral we are making today, just as we understand the magnitude of the crime against democracy that we describe in our report. But we have gone where the facts and the law lead us, and inescapably, they lead us here.
The extensive body of evidence about the attack on the U.S. Capitol came from months of hearings, 1,200 interviews, and dozens of subpoenas, leading to the recommendation Trump and others be charged on 4 counts: obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to make a false statement, and most seriously, inciting an insurrection. If convicted, Trump could be barred from ever holding office again.
No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again.
The criminal referral is non-binding. The supporting evidence may be used by the Department of Justice, where a special counsel is leading 2 investigations into the former president over January 6th and his alleged mishandling of classified documents.
I think the DOJ is closer to the end than the beginning. They know that they can't wait forever here because you're going to run up against the 2024 election.
The committee also dropped hints about other potential crimes, namely witness tampering, alleging Trump-backed attorneys offered key witnesses high-paying jobs.
The witness believed this was an effort to affect her testimony, and we are concerned that these efforts may have been a strategy to prevent the committee from finding the truth.
The Select Committee stands adjourned.
Though the committee faced criticism for focusing almost exclusively on the role of Trump, its final report, released later this week, may offer more insight into the role that others played, documenting one of the darkest chapters in modern American history. For all it investigated, the committee also laid the groundwork for avoiding another attempted overthrow of democracy. In the coming days, lawmakers will vote on changes to the Electoral Count Act to more clearly define the powers of a vice president in certifying elections, closing the loophole that Trump attempted to use on January 6th. Sophie?
Jackson Proskow in Washington. Jackson, thank you. And as the January 6th committee wraps its findings against Trump, Washington is preparing for the trial of 5 members of the U.S.-based Proud Boys for their alleged involvement in the January 6th Capitol attack. Jury selection for the trial began today. The members are accused of sedition. The prosecution will argue the defendants plotted in advance of January 6th to stop the lawful transfer of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, and that the leader of the group, Enrique Tarrio, put together a hand-picked crew to lead those efforts. Sedition carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. Well, the holiday travel season is just starting to ramp up, and already the warnings are out to expect long delays. Through the weekend and today, more Canadian flights were delayed than departed on time. Cold weather is slowing down operations at major hubs like Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, and Vancouver. Ongoing labor shortages mean airlines and airports just don't have anyone to call in for backfill, let alone increase staffing levels. And people in Metro Vancouver are being warned to brace for another significant snowfall while still digging out from the latest wintry blast. Over the weekend, as much as 30 centimeters fell on the region, making many roads dangerous. The forecast calls for temperatures across BC to dip into the negative double digits for much of this week. Rising anxiety in Ukraine coming up. The fresh fears Belarus will back Russia in battle. Plus, frightening flight, the trip that sent some people to hospital. And Fortnite fine, why the maker of the video game is being ordered to pay up. The Canadian government has started the process to seize assets belonging to a high-profile Russian billionaire. The government first announced sanctions against Roman Abramovich back in March. Now it's pursuing the forfeiture of $26 million from a company owned by the oligarch called Granite Capital Holdings. Abramovich, who is worth an estimated $14 billion, has long been seen as an ally and financial middleman for Vladimir Putin and is the former owner of Chelsea Football Club. Any money recovered by Canada will be given to Ukraine for reconstruction and compensation. In and around Kyiv, people woke this morning to a string of powerful explosions with a large-scale Russian drone attack on Ukraine's power grid. As Crystal Goomansingh reports, the strikes come as the Russian president meets with his closest ally, the leader of Belarus.
Reduced to rubble and searched for drone remnants. This was once the home of an elderly couple. There was one very loud explosion, and we did not really know how it would end for us. Inside what's left of their home, Olha's daughter-in-law calls for the family dog. She knows it's likely buried, but she's grateful her parents survived. The home, about 40 minutes south of Kyiv, is believed to have been hit by a so-called kamikaze drone. The family hands over anything that could confirm the cause of the explosion. Attacking civilians is a war crime. Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office has registered more than 54,000 possible war crimes and acts of aggression by Russia. Tuesday will mark day 300 of Vladimir Putin's three-day special operation. The Russian president was in Belarus Monday, visiting with his closest ally, President Alexander Lukashenko. In Ukraine, there are fears Belarus is getting ready to join Russia after deploying troops along the border. While addressing a UK-led group of 10 northern European nations, the Ukrainian president implored his allies to keep sending modern weapons.
Thank you for so powerfully highlighting the incredible humanitarian cost to your people.
A series of aerial assaults going back to October have targeted the country's power grid, causing sweeping blackouts and freezing temperatures. Ukraine's emergency services released dramatic video of a fire at a power station said to have been recorded in the early morning hours. Ukraine's national energy company says it will soon be able to make repairs at substations and stabilize the power supply. SEL, an American company, fabricated and shipped more than 100 pieces of equipment specially made for Ukraine's needs. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
After weeks of debate, the European Union's energy ministers have agreed on a price cap of Russian gas. The system is complicated, but at its core, it will cap the price EU nations pay for Russian natural gas at €180 per megawatt hour. The price today is sitting at €109. The goal is to end Russia's ability to hold the European energy market hostage and prevent a repeat of August's huge price spikes. 31 sailors are missing after a Thai warship capsized and sank overnight. 75 members of the crew have been rescued. The 77-meter corvette was caught in a storm in the Gulf of Thailand, and its electrical system failed, leaving the crew unable to steer or pump out water. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing, but the odds of finding any more survivors are not good. Passengers on a flight to Honolulu were rocked by severe turbulence Sunday, seriously injuring 11 people.
If you need people to carry bags out, use Ka'ale back there.
The incident happened about a half hour before the aircraft landed. Of the 278 passengers on board, responders treated 36 people. Injuries included head wounds, lacerations, bruising, and loss of consciousness. Officials with Hawaiian Airlines called it an isolated and unusual incident, saying they will conduct a thorough investigation of the plane before it returns to service. Epic Games, maker of the hit video game Fortnite, has agreed to pay $520 million U.S. in fines to consumers and the U.S. government. In an agreement with the Federal Trade Commission, Epic will pay $275 million in government fines for gathering personal information of children under the age of 13 without receiving their parents' consent. The other $245 million will be refunded to users for misleading them into buying paid content. It's the largest settlement in FTC history. Biodiversity breakthrough just ahead. The details of the draft agreement from Montreal's COP15 conference. There's been a breakthrough at the UN's Biodiversity Conference in Montreal. After weeks of exhausting and sometimes tense negotiations, delegates reached a draft agreement on protecting Earth's ecosystems. That includes fulfilling ambitious so-called 30 by 30 goals. The new deal means nearly 200 nations are committing to protect 30% of the world's land and 30% of coastal and marine areas by the year 2030. Drolet takes a closer look at the new pledges and just how feasible they really are.
At 3:30 in the morning, exhaustion gave way to elation. Cheers erupted when delegates finally reached a deal on protecting the planet from self-inflicted disaster.
We are finally starting to forge a peace pact with nature.
The pact includes 23 targets. The main pledge is 30 by 30, conserving a third of land and water by the end of the decade.
This moment represents a historic win. It is a win for biodiversity, it is a win for people, and it is a win for climate.
Canada hosted and China led the summit, which was delayed by 2 years because of the pandemic. The goal, saving nature from climate change and development. The framework includes a commitment to cut $500 billion in subsidies to industries that pollute, slashing pesticide use in half, and nearly doubling worldwide conservation spending to $200 billion.
Biodiversity is declining at its fastest rate in human history, with 1 million plant and animal species at risk of extinction. While the delegates all agree on the need to save them, there were disagreements on who should foot the bill.
Developing countries walked out of talks last week, demanding wealthy countries help them fund the plan. The Democratic Republic of Congo, home to the world's second largest rainforest, tried to hold up final approval.
I was there on Friday, just a few days ago. Wasn't clear it was going to land.
Some scientists worry there's too much wiggle room.
Well, I believe that we can go a long way if the agreement is implemented. That's always the issue, right?
The previous agreement failed to fully reach a single one of 20 global targets. So that doesn't happen this time. The Liberals promised to bring their plan to Parliament next year.
Very transparent legislation and forcing the government to be accountable for what we're doing and how far we're progressing towards our goals.
Goals to halt the loss of biodiversity and high expectations this historic deal will deliver. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
Also in Montreal, some residents have found themselves homeless for the holidays. The exterior wall of an apartment building fell away, exposing the entire unit to the street. The fire department says it's possible the structure was damaged after the demolition of a neighboring building earlier this year. Today, crews were on site doing temporary repairs. The wall collapsed on Thursday, and after 3 days of shelter provided by the Red Cross, residents will need to find somewhere else to stay until structural repairs are complete. There's a new discovery near Peru's Nazca plain. Drones and aerial photographs revealed 168 previously undetected figures carved into the ground. The geoglyphs show humans, llamas and alpacas, orcas, snakes and cats, along with other animals. The line drawings are much smaller, 2 to 6 meters in length on average, than the famed Nazca lines nearby. The lines are more than 2,000 years old. Their origins and purpose remains a mystery. Saying sorry. Next, reaction to the Dutch Prime Minister's slave trade apology. An historic day in the Netherlands. The Dutch Prime Minister has apologized for the country's role in the slave trade. At one point in the 17th century, the Dutch West India Company was the largest transatlantic slave trader. Mark Rutte today apologizing to anyone who suffered, including those who were enslaved and their descendants. Redmond Shannon now on the apology and why many say it's not enough.
The Hague, home of the International Criminal Court. On Monday, the city saw the Dutch Prime Minister himself issue a historic apology for what he calls a crime against humanity.
For centuries, the Dutch state enabled and stimulated slavery and profited from it. Human beings were made into commodities, exploited and abused.
Today, I apologize.
Mark Rutte says those alive today are not responsible, but descendants of slaves still live with the consequences. Government ministers visited former colonies to make similar statements. Over different periods, the Dutch Empire conquered land across the globe, in North and South America, the Caribbean, Western and Southern Africa, South Asia, and what is now Indonesia. Rutte's apology was recommended in a report published last year, commissioned in the wake of the worldwide racial justice protests after the murder of George Floyd in the United States. The Prime Minister's words received a mixed reaction from voters.
The excuses?
Those apologies came too late. There is so much suffering and hatred from slavery, it cannot be settled in one day.
For years, Caribbean countries have been saying any settlement must include financial reparations from former colonizers, including Britain and France.
Quite literally, these European states are founded in large part on the slave trade, the naval and political power that came from the slave trade, and on imperial rivalry.
Countries like the Netherlands have tried to avoid the question of reparations coming from former colonies like Suriname. The debate is controversial even as Dutch attitudes to history change. This year, King Willem-Alexander said royals will no longer use a golden carriage featuring images of slavery. There are calls that he apologised too.
But it has to be an apology that doesn't come with the whiff of avoidance of deeper issues.
For now, the Dutch government has promised funding to awareness projects and a slavery museum. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Sophie Louis. Tonight's Your Canada is the Ring art installation in Montreal. It's 30 meters in diameter and weighs a hefty 23,000 kilos or 50,000 pounds. Thanks for watching and have yourselves a great night.